Sean Diddy Combs has been arrested in a Manhattan hotel this evening after a grand jury indicted the music mogul.
Washington Post, just one question, did he or didn't he?
What are they now trying to do with these witnesses in order to prove the sex trafficking and racketeering?
Welcome to a special edition of the 25th Hour, the trial of Sean P. Diddy Combs, with your hosts, Bianca Forde and Alyse Adamson.
Welcome to another season of the 25th Hour podcast, this time the weekly Diddy Debrief, your weekly breakdown of everything happening both inside and outside the courtroom.
We are your favorite former federal prosecutors here to cut through the noise, unpack the legal drama, and answer the question we're all asking. Is it a RICO yet?
Each week, we're recapping the biggest developments in the federal case against Sean P. Diddy Combs, from testimony that made waves to strategy decisions that you might have missed.
So grab your coffee or your cocktail and join us for this weekly deep dive into the Diddy trial. I've missed you, girl.
I've missed you too. I mean, last time we were on this thing, we were talking about Project 2025. Clearly, not enough people heard us.
Can I just say, it is so clear that the Project 2025 playbook is so well and in effect right now. We warned y'all.
If you didn't listen, you can go ahead and review our first season. We were on point, but this season, we're gonna do something that, can we say it's lighter? I mean, this is the trial of Sean P. Diddy Combs, and honestly, both the charges and the testimony that I've heard already are absolutely horrific. So not lighter fare than Project 2025. Maybe not, we could say it doesn't have widespread implications for democracy.
Well, arguably it does. And I gotta tell you, I was having that conversation with someone about the fact that this is a gender violence case, right? And about the impact of this case in terms of witnesses feeling as though, and victims being protected the way that they deserve to be protected. And those are the widespread implications of this case.
No, you're right. I mean, I was speaking to some folks last night, and all that's true, but I think the counter to that is, well, they should have brought domestic violence charges, or they should have just brought the sex trafficking. I think some people are questioning why the government decided to bring the RICO, questioning whether it was an overreach, and then in that same conversation, questioning whether it means Cassie won't get the justice she deserves. Because if they had just brought this as a Mann Act, the transportation charges, I mean, I think the government already has them dead to rights. They have male escorts testifying that they flew around the country to participate in these freak-offs and they were paid for it. I think they're good there. Sex trafficking obviously is going to be a little bit harder because they have to demonstrate that Cassie was coerced, although, and we'll dive into the testimony from this past week, I don't know how this is not coercive.
Yeah.
But then you have this RICO. It's so technically complicated, Bianca, and I went back and reread the RICO statute because this is racketeering conspiracy. It's not a substantive RICO. So easier to prove, but even being easier to prove because it's a conspiracy and not the acts, the jury instructions are very confusing. And I'm just concerned that the nuance of this testimony is going to get lost on the jury. It's just, I don't know.
I agree with you. And, I think that R. Kelly was obviously prosecuted under RICO and convicted under RICO. And I think that that may have influenced the government's decision in this case to pursue a RICO charge against Sean Combs. But I will say the R. Kelly case was very different, right? Like that was an instance where there were dozens of underage victims over the course of over a decade, if not multiple, that were transported across state lines to be in illicit relationships with him, including a woman that we all know and love, well, not personally, but adored as an artist, right? Aaliyah, that came out in the trial or shortly before the trial, that R. Kelly had actually married Aaliyah when she was a teenager, and was horrible to these women in terms of having them interact with bodily fluid. There was an allegation that he had one woman wipe feces on her face, and he did this in the name of music. What are you willing to do to be famous? What are you willing to do for music? He asked his victims that. That is a clear indication of him using his power and his enterprise and his position in the way that's anticipated by RICO. But I have a question. I have a hypo, and I want you to just walk through this with me, okay?
Okay.
Let's imagine we have John Smith. Um,
Is John Smith
John Smith
a music mogul?
John Smith is not a music mogul. In fact,
Okay.
John Smith doesn't have a job. But John Smith is a womanizer, okay? He has a wife, a girlfriend, and a mistress. He beats all of them, okay? He's into some kinky stuff. He takes them to swingers clubs, and he likes to order escorts. And he likes to watch these women have sex with these escorts. And they don't necessarily want to do it, but they love him so much that they say yes. He also provides them with drugs. And they do drugs together while they are engaged in these activities. He has a number of friends, really loyal friends who are close to him that have seen him abuse these women. They've threatened the women to get them to not to have them not talk about it. When the women try to leave, they've threatened to get them to come back. One woman had an affair with someone else and they set his house on fire, right? This is John Smith. Now, at some point, the women report this to the police and John Smith is arrested. What is the government charging in this case, from your perspective, Elise?
Well, first of all, I want to know why all these women are doing this if
You
John
got
Smith
that
has
good,
got no
good.
job. How's
You
he
got that
doing
good,
this?
good, Elise.
That's my first question. And I mean, I say it partially as a joke, but partially it's true because one of the like, distinguishing factors for R. Kelly and Combs is that they're rich and famous, and that's how they trap these young women in the first place. That was the bait. But let's just go along with this hypo.
Stick with
I
my hypo.
I would say it depends. First of all, have they exceeded the statute of limitations on some of the other stuff? I think that was one of the factors in the government's charging decision here personally, because
Sure.
some of the underlying offenses couldn't be prosecuted anymore and they had to bring Combs to justice in some way. I will say, I mean, your hypo is pretty much the same. It's the exact same conduct as
Except,
the present case, except it's just a Joe Schmo, a John Smith. If he really did have a bunch of people in his orbit and they were committing racketeering activities, the bunch of crimes to accomplish this guy's goals, then it does kind of sound like a criminal enterprise in fact, because there's two different kinds of corrupt enterprises. There's like actual legal entities, and then there are
sure.
these enterprises in fact. I would say if the conduct was egregious enough, if they were bringing women across state lines, maybe. I mean, it's a big maybe. I think what's so hard about this particular case is the details. It's the fact that, you know, you have those emails of Cassie saying that she wanted to freak off. It's that it was very consenting, and it is that Cassie was potentially getting a benefit. In your hypo, I don't see the benefit to any of these women. So I'm like, how was that not coercive? Um, but I think it's a good question. I do think it's a good question, and I've got to give the lawyerly answer. And so it just depends. We'd need to examine the case, see the scale and the scope of the conduct. But I think it is possible. I mean, that's why they use RICO the way they do, which is to bring in, you know, semi-organized criminal enterprises, right?
Sure. I think, the issue that I'm having in answering the question of is there a RICO yet, is that RICO was created to target those who commit these
Racketeering activities. I just call it a bunch of crimes.
through an enterprise, right? Through an enterprise, not to target people who commit really bad acts and happen to also own an enterprise, right? And I think that that is the part of this that's troubling me. It's on paper, does it sound like it might, like the elements are applicable? Perhaps, but it takes us to that fundamental question as a prosecutor and as a person, right? Whenever you have a decision to make, whenever you have discretion to do a thing, what can I do and what should I do, right? And if you're answering those questions, a lot of times the answer is not the same. And I think in this case, yes, the government can charge a RICO, but should they have? I'm not quite there yet.
The answer I keep giving when I'm being asked this question, and I do say I'm seeing the RICO develop, but it's not all the way there. The prosecution said that their case in chief was going to take what, 6 weeks? We're only in week 2. We're recapping week 2
Sure.
right now.
It's early.
So
It's early.
it's early. So it's possible that there's a lot we don't know. They had an indictment, but it wasn't a large, sweeping, speaking indictment like we saw
Right.
with President Trump, for instance, right?
Right.
And we saw a detention memorandum that was filed in September that added a little bit more color. And I do want to talk about that because I reviewed that memo yesterday, and they were trying to argue why Combs was too dangerous or why he was most likely to commit witness intimidation by violence if he was not, put in jail during pending this trial. And one of the things that they mentioned in that memo was the Kid Cudi break-in incident. And we're going to talk a lot about Kid Cudi's testimony in a moment, but there are allegations that Combs broke into Kid Cudi's house, wanted to confront him about dating Cassie. But in this detention memo, they added more. They said he kidnapped a female at gunpoint to gain access to the home and used his associate to do it. And we know his associate was Capricorn Clark because that was testimony that came out from Kid Cudi as well. If that is evidence that they are going to offer and prove in this trial, that to me brings it up a notch. Now you're talking about using members of your company to kidnap people at gunpoint to break into some dude's house. And I don't care if the dude happens to be your girl's new boyfriend, because at that point you are using your enterprise to achieve certain purposes. And here it was retribution and intimidation. I mean, that and the kidnapping itself is one of those racketeering activities that was actually charged in the indictment. So there's a lot more that can come out.
There's a lot more. I agree with you. We're just not there yet.
So why don't we recap this last week to see where we are, right? Because a lot of people testified, and honestly, we don't have time to go through it all. I also am asking myself, if this many people testified in a week, what is the prosecution going to be doing for the next 4 weeks? How many more people, or is it just going to be a bunch of documentary evidence? They got to enter in text messages and all that stuff. We already have, when trial ended, time of this recording, they stopped for the long weekend. They had a HSI, Homeland Security Intelligence individual testifying, laying the foundation to get some computers into evidence. I'm sure they're going to offer what was on those computers. That can take a while, but let's just go through who testified. So you have that agent, you have another agent, Agent Goddard, who testified about the search warrant at Combs's Miami residence. Dr. Dawn Hughes is a psychologist. She testified. Sheree Hayes, that was another erotic performer. Regina Ventura, Cassie's mother. David James, an assistant to Combs. Don Richard, former member of Danity Kane, close associate to Cassie and Combs. Mila Morales, former makeup artist to Cassie Ventura.
Yeah.
George Kaplan and Scott Muscudi, better known as Kid Cudi. That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
So Bianca, tell me, we're not going to cover all of them, but did any of these people offer anything that was helpful to the prosecution? And what stuck out in your mind from this past week?
Well, look, I think Kid Cudi, Scott Muscudi's testimony. Do you know whether the kidnapping piece came out in terms of?
It did not, but it couldn't. It
That's
couldn't come out through him because he wasn't there when
He
Combs.
wasn't there.
What you know what?
He wasn't there.
Can I just aside? Do you know what he said that Combs went into his house and opened up his Christmas presents?
I did not hear about.
He had Christmas presents on his table, and P. Diddy went up in there and opened up his Christmas gifts and locked his dog in a bathroom. Like, just who does that?
I did read that. He locked the dog in the bathroom, and Kid Cudi came home and was upset, and he wanted to find him and fight him. But I guess that part didn't happen. And the car was blown up. The Porsche was set on fire after that, right? Like subsequent to that break-in.
Yeah. So the timeline is December 22nd. Is when the break-in happened. He filed a police report. That is also the day cited in that detention memo of the kidnapping, and the kidnapping facts match those of the break-in. And then January 9th is when the Porsche exploded in his front yard. And that was just a few weeks after Christmas. And Kid Cudi testified that he had spent Christmas in Connecticut with Cassie Ventura and her family. So I'm sure Combs was not happy about that.
And Diddy's friends helped him get into Cudi's house.
Well, that is something that the government's going to have to prove, because again, all Kid Cudi could offer was that Capricorn Clark, who's an associate of Diddy, and that's important for the RICO, right? That's a member of this Combs enterprise. Capricorn Clark called him from in front of Cudi's house. Cudi testified that it almost sounded like she was near tears and said, Puff's is in your house. And he called him up, and sure enough, he said, yeah, I'm waiting here for you.
That's fascinating. And we've gone back and forth on this a bit. But can we really say that Capricorn Clark was an extension of the conspiracy if she is calling Cudi to warn him that Diddy is in his house and she's on the verge of tears while doing that, right?
Yeah, I think we can, because when I went back and I was really reading the RICO statute and how you prove this agreement, all they need to do is essentially prove that there were people working at the direction of this corrupt enterprise and they were engaging in illegal activity and that they were coming to some kind of conspiratorial agreement. So the
Sure, but
difference
what was
between, yeah,
I think the Cudi example is one of the strongest elements of the RICO, right? When you pair it with the domestic violence and the other activity, particularly involving Cassie. But what exactly was Capricorn Clark doing in that moment? That right? Like
he drove him.
what was she
He
doing?
drove
She
an
drove
armed
him
man.
there.
She drove an armed man to go and break and enter into somebody's home. And this is the thing, like, was there actually even renouncement of the crime? Like calling up somebody and letting them know there's a crime in progress. She didn't yank Combs out. She didn't call the police. So, she warned him, but she also
But
drove
but, but
Combs over there.
driving someone to commit a crime is not a predicate act under RICO, is
It
it?
doesn't need to be a predicate act. What they need to
Okay.
prove is that, because for this RICO, there needs to be more than one person involved. It needs to be an
Sure.
enterprise. So there needs, so all in my mind, what the government needs to demonstrate is that employees were engaged in helping to bring about these unlawful acts for the benefit of this corrupt enterprise. And this is intimidation. He was going in. It's a means and methods of the RICO as well.
Sure.
He
I agree
went
with
in
that.
and she drove him there. And we don't know, because Cudi's testimony does not provide the complete account. He can only testify to what he heard on the other end of the phone and what he saw in the aftermath, which was his Christmas presents all torn up and his dog in the bathroom. Okay. Combs had already left by the time he went home. So we don't know at what point Capricorn Clark started feeling funny about it. It's possible, the evidence will show, that after she witnessed somebody being held at gunpoint into the house, that's when she decided to make that phone call. But we don't know what happened before that. Was she more willing? But I don't even think you need that. I think you have the driving an armed man to go break in and enter. That's an employee engaging in these unlawful acts in furtherance of this corrupt enterprise. I don't think
That
it really,
too.
their intent, I should make it simpler, right? Here's a legal nerds. Their intent doesn't matter. Their intent doesn't matter. It's, were their
It's just
employees,
simply them facilitating
were
this
they
act by doing.
facilitating it? Exactly. And were they doing it in a semi-organized way? They don't need to have a formal structure. You need not have a formal structure. There can be even a loose structure, but they need to be working within this corrupt enterprise, the enterprise, and there needs to be some kind of conspiratorial agreements. Driving someone with a gun to go break and enter, that seems pretty, tacit agreement to me. But these are the arguments that the government's going to have to make in closing. But I actually, I thought that testimony and the potential for more in that fact pattern could help tighten up the government's case a little bit. Because before that testimony, what did we have? We had a few of his assistants putting condoms, lube, and maybe some drugs in the hotel room. The drugs would be the strongest hook, but the other stuff.
I think one of the interesting things that I read was, I don't know if this came out in trial as yet, but there were some records of conversations between the hotel, maybe the hotel manager and staff, that basically said, whenever this group checks in, make sure you add an extra $1,000 to the security deposit, because and spray outside of the room. There's always an excessive amount of not baby oil, but oil, they said, like all over the sheets, etc. So I thought that was interesting that the hotel had observed this, right? And was making changes to how it typically goes about it. It's a little humor, I guess,
He
in
was a
terms of how that was
known
coming out.
hotel room
Yeah.
messer upper.
Destroyer.
Destroyer.
Yeah.
They said there leaves wax all over the place is one of the notes.
Yes, candle wax. The
Candle
little, like,
wax.
just come on. Why did it have to be so wild? Just
Everybody wants cheap airfare, but where do you find it? You call low-cost airlines. They specialize in cheap flights, discount hotel rooms, cheap car rental rates, and with a best price guarantee. If you want the lowest prices on your airline tickets or other travel services, call now. That's right, call. That's the only way to get these rates. Experts are standing by 24/7 to get you the cheapest airfare and hotel rates available. So don't wait. Call now.
Dawn Richard testified. She started last week and she continued over into this week. I happened to be in New York and saw a little bit of her testimony. She was interesting in that she corroborated a lot of the abuse, which I think is the strongest part of the government's case. She placed a lot of Diddy's people in the room, in the zone of being able to observe the abuse and other types of activity, primarily the abuse, though. But one of the things she said, she described one of his security guards as his brother, right? So, I think when you think about someone like Sean Combs, who has multiple businesses, I'd imagine the people around him are the closest people to him in a lot of ways, right? Like the people that he's choosing to be security are people he's known for maybe decades. And you compare that to my John Smith, kind of similar, right? Like it's really loyal friends who are around you. The only difference is Sean Combs happens to be a multimillionaire or a billionaire. But Dawn Richard was fascinating to me once we got to cross-examination because there were a lot of things, a lot of prior inconsistent statements and really effective impeachment that was done on cross. One of the things that she testified to on direct was that she saw money exchanged when drugs were sold to Diddy by this guy named One Stop. And on cross, Nicole Westmoreland was able to bring out the fact that when Miss Richard had spoken to the prosecutors on prior occasions, she never mentioned that she'd seen money exchanged. In fact, she said she hadn't seen money exchanged. The same type of inconsistency came out with a gun. She originally said she'd never seen Sean Combs with a gun. Then a couple of interviews down the line with the prosecutors, she had seen him with a gun. However, she acknowledged that it's not uncommon for celebrities and people of Sean Combs' stature to carry guns for protection. She'd never seen him use it violently. She'd never seen him wave it around. And then obviously most concerning was the threat that I think was core to the government's case in terms of her testimony that only came out the 8th time she spoke with the government, right? In terms of the threat that people will go missing. So, she was an interesting witness.
Well, what do you think? I mean, if you're a juror and
I
you
don't
hear all
trust
that,
her. I
yeah?
don't trust her. I think her memory. And the other thing, and if I'm the government, I am all over this in my closing argument. She said that the government tried to rehabilitate her by asking her about the process through which she gained her memories back because this had happened a long time ago. And she said, with time, things came back and with talking to other people. I would
Mm,
be all over that. Now
mhm.
her memories are just mixed and they're just mush.
Do you think they really need her?
No, I don't think they need her. And I think that as you and I have talked about, like I really at times I was sitting there like, why is she even here? Like, what is she offering? She was not a strong witness. She was not compelling. Her ability to communicate her thoughts left some things to be desired, right? So that was sort of a wash.
Okay, well, another witness,
Mm,
Regina Ventura, Cassie's mother. I think she's the opposite end of the witness
yeah.
spectrum from all the reporting. It seems like she was a very good witness. The defense chose not to cross her. That is obviously a strategic decision, but let's talk about maybe why they didn't. And what she offered was correspondence from her daughter, you know, basically detailing some abuse and concerns, saying that Combs was threatening. It was extortion, right? Threatening to release some of the explicit tapes if she didn't pay Combs $20,000, which is laughable because here's Combs, this
Right.
multimillionaire, and here's Cassie, this young lady who's signed to his record deal getting paid by Combs, and he demanded $20,000. And that testimony came in.
Yeah.
And I believe Regina Ventura also testified to receiving pictures of some of Cassie's abuse. All of that came in, and she wasn't crossed. So what
Yeah.
do you think the significance was of that testimony in general of this? I mean, I'm calling it extortion like conduct because or blackmail, and then also the defense's decision not to cross her.
Yeah. So I think what came out is that Sean Combs actually gave the money back, right? So it was clearly just this sort of um, tactic of intimidation and control, which the defense has already acknowledged, right? He's a monster. He's a joke. He's a jerk, right? He's controlling. He's violent. And I think what could play into it is Cassie's mom's demeanor on the stand. If she was an incredibly emotional witness that maybe came across as extremely soft spoken, um, that coupled with the fact that, yes, she corroborated what Cassie said. The difference between her and Cassie was that the defense needed to spend time undermining the whole duress coercion piece of this, right? So, I mean, I guess there were some things that the defense could have asked Cassie's mom, but when you think about it's hard to know what they I would assume that they thought that she didn't offer enough that was outside of what they've already acknowledged to be their theory of the case, right?
And also
That
they
would be
might seem unlikable if they're beating up on some abuse
well, yeah, that's
victim's
what I mean by
mother.
demeanor,
Yeah.
right? Like
And
they had to go after Cassie to a degree, but they may have decided, let's just let the mom slide. Like here's this emotional mom worried about her daughter, and you're playing head games with her by asking her for $20,000 and then giving it back to her the next day.
and she had the receipts. I mean, that's the other thing. You can't cross it receipts. Like they had
You
the
can't
proof
cross her.
that
Yeah.
she paid. And not only did she paid one of Combs's companies.
Well, that's an
And then
interesting
he
fact.
gave it back. So
Yeah.
there you go. Like, that's another piece that I think the
Yeah.
government will
Yeah.
use that.
That's actually a strong piece. That is a strong piece of RICO evidence right there. So
And what were they
20.
going to
Yeah.
do? They can't cross the fact that it went into his company account. They can't
Right.
cross the fact that she got the money back. I actually think it was smart to let it
To
sit
let it
because then
go.
they can do whatever they want. They can frame it however they want in closing. How about what's your take on the search warrant? So they had an Agent Goddard, get up there and testify about some of the items that were found during the search of Combs' residence. What's interesting is the government fronted the fact that I think they said there's like 90 agents that were involved or law enforcement officers that were involved in this raid. And then they went on to explain why so many were necessary, why there was an armed vehicle busting through the gate. They fronted that. And then the agent testified that they found AR-15s and some guns that had their serial numbers
Yeah, that's a
removed.
big
Back when
one.
we were prosecuting, we called those obliterated serial numbers. So why why did the government make a big to-do about how that search warrant was executed? And I mean, what do you think about those obliterated serial numbers? My take is, what are you doing? Once again, you're a mogul and
Yeah.
you're
Now you
living.
have ghost guns.
Yeah, those were ghost guns. You're living like you're part of a street gang.
I think that the importance of the search warrant testimony was really more so about what they found that was relevant to the freak offs, right? From my understanding, the way that the home was set up, even up until the search warrant was executed, it looked as though freak offs were continuing well into 2024, right?
Bianca,
So
they were continuing to the day before he was arrested. Did they
I
search this
hadn't heard
man's
this.
hotel? Okay. I mean, this tells you how sick I am. I'm reading every detail. I mean, I don't know what that says about what I do with my free time. When they arrested Combs in September of 2024, they found baby oil and Astroglide in his
In
hotel
his
room,
hotel room.
among other things. This man knew there was an arrest warrant. He flew from California to New York to turn himself in on an arrest warrant for RICO and sex trafficking. And it looks, again, I wasn't there, okay? But he had all the makings of a freak off in his hotel room. So what
I
was
mean, how
that?
much was it? Just like a little bit of leftover that might have been in a
Bianca,
carry-on that he used before?
ma'am, who is bringing baby oil and Astroglide in their carry-on? And also, I know as the prosecutors, you're not allowed to use like prior bad acts to prove a new offense. But come on, we don't check our common sense at the door either. He was using his favorite things were there with him. So it looks like he was trying to get one last FO
One
in
last freak off in.
before he turned himself in. But what that just speaks to how sick he is. You're facing life in prison, my guy, and you're bringing the tools of your crime to the hotel room the day before you're arrested?
So what about you? Which witnesses stood out to you? Who do you
Yeah.
think has been the most impactful so far?
Yeah, I definitely Cudi. We keep talking about him because he's now helping the government establish those predicate offenses, though that racketeering activity, and I think he's laying the foundation for the other side of that story. Um, you know, they tried to cross him and they tried to smear Cassie on cross. They said Cassie played you, right? And Cudi agreed.
I did read
And they
that,
said
yeah.
you played just like Combs, and he agreed. So I mean, like the inference is that she's some kind of two-timing person who had agency, and they said something like, she was living a double life, kind of setting it up like
Right.
there's two Cassies. And I don't know. I mean, maybe that could have resonated for a juror or two, but for me, I'm like, or this poor young girl wanted a shot at a real relationship and couldn't leave Combs. So I think Kid Cudi's testimony, all in all, he was a great witness. He was very true to himself, dropped some F bombs. I think he was really helpful to the defense. I mean, to the prosecution rather. Then you had George Kaplan, a former
Assistant.
assistant of
Yeah.
Combs, who didn't want to testify. He invoked his fifth, and the judge
Yes,
gave
he
him
got
immunity
immunity.
to testify. And he testified to witnessing abuse, um, witnessing Combs throwing things at a former girlfriend. And just, I think his setting the rooms up, I think he was one of the ones that
Yes,
testified he put drugs in. I think that was
that's
also
a strong
a
piece.
strong piece
That's a
for that
strong piece.
RICO, and he quit because it was so bad. If that also demonstrates that this is not operating like a normal business. You
Normal
don't see
business.
your
Yeah.
boss, beating people and
Yeah.
helping and asking you to help cover it up, because I believe those were some of the requests, get food for this person, conceal this. That's
Sure.
all in the indictment too. So
Yeah.
I thought Kaplan was a strong witness, and I think the true extent of the testimony won't be known until we see how the prosecution uses it in closing argument. I think a lot of what was coming out is going to be used in closing. So yeah, I would say Kaplan. Oh, then there was Morales, the makeup artist.
Yeah, it sounds like she was much better than Don Richard, right? Like they did not need Don Richard.
No, much better. And then it looks like the defense tried to get a gotcha moment. They said, "You've done 8 interviews about this. Have you ever been paid?" And she said, "No, she hasn't been paid. There's no financial motive." Don Richard, there were a few financial motives that the
Yeah, for sure.
defense drew out. Morales didn't have any. She'd been working with Cassie since she was like 16 years old.
Sure.
Um,
And you know who else was corroborating? Miss Morgan, the ex-best friend who
yes.
her friendship ended with Cassie because Sean Combs assaulted Miss Morgan. Um, she was a good corroborator as well. So between Miss Morales and Miss Morgan, it really just begs the question of why the government really thought they needed Miss Richard. Um, but on the RICO, I think we've identified the three strongest witnesses here, right? The personal assistant who helped set up the room for the freak offs, mom having to pay $20,000 to the enterprise, and the thuggishness that resulted in Kid Cudi's house being broken into and car being set on fire. Okay, it's starting to smell more like RICO over here.
I agree. I mean, I'm also I'm saying they need to do more to connect these
They
dots.
need to do more,
It's
yeah.
always important to remind folks that he is legally innocent
Innocent,
until proven guilty. We're
proven
talking about what
guilty.
people have said under oath, but it's ultimately going to be the jury that decides his guilt here. So these are all allegations, and in a few weeks we'll see what if the jury really thinks they're allegations, or if they find that the government's proved them all beyond a reasonable doubt. We will be back same time with another recap, so don't miss it on the weekly Diddy Debrief. I'm your host, Alyse.
And I'm Bianca, and we'll see you next time.